welcome back to the Integrate Intelligently podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Brickler, accompanied by the founder and CEO of the CADTALK software, Scott Bickler. Today, no guest today. Today, Scott and I are talking about configurations and topics about building integrations in terms of configurability versus customizations, building a one-off integration versus having a platform or having some other kind of tool out there to help speed up integration. So Scott, good to see you again.
Good to see you too, man.
So Scott, tell me, briefly describe kind of the two processes that I kind of see when someone decides to build integrations, whether that's our integration or just integrations in, maybe it was two or three approaches maybe, but essentially there are couple approaches that I see that customers or people can have for integrations. One is the tried and true method of building your own, right? From the ground up, building everything. You know, it's like building your own house, right? You're going to order all the 2x4s, order all the sheetrock, do all that work and put it all together, right? That's sort of one approach. The next approach, I would call a custom integration. The next approach may be some kind of middleware that's a middleware, like what you might call an ETL solution. That is like maybe a kind of like Zapier is for SaaS apps, but there's some out there like Delboomi or MuleSoft or other ones like that, where it's a platform, a general platform that you use for ETL integrations. There is some some pre-built things in there, but you still have to build a lot on top of that. And then lastly is kind of a platform integration service, which does a very specific or niche thing, which is, pre-built for a specific use case. Does that about cover what you see out there? Or am I missing something?
No, that's a good description. I mean, I think that there's different levels of complexity. I think it's confusing out there for a lot of people about where do these different products sit and where do they, kind of what level of granularity they give you in solving your problem, right? And obviously, as if you go down to the very lowest end, which is the custom integration, being the most flexible but the hardest to implement, and then you go up to the highest, is usually the most kind of prescriptive way of doing it, a formulaic way of doing it, but maybe not do it exactly the way that you want to do it. Which there's pros and cons of that as well. So, yeah.
So if we look at like the way I'm visualizing it is like a kind of a spectrum, right? On the one side of the spectrum is kind of like DIY, right? Get everything you want, whatever you want, exactly how you want it, all the way to the right of like something that's you just download it or whatever, you install it, it does what it does. There's nothing, it just does what it does, and that's what you get, whether that works for you or not. And then of course there's things in between, right? That flow between in that spectrum.
Yeah, that's basically how it works. And I mean, it's and there's, like I said, if the custom one is obviously it does exactly what you want, but the downside is it does exactly what you want and what you have to tell it exactly what you want, right? So there's it will do, like, that's obviously the most flexibility is in a custom integration, but it usually tends to be, you basically got a programming language, and you've got, or some kind of tool, and then you've got like your problem you're trying to solve. So there's no, like, the way I look at it is like, what knowledge is embedded into the solution that you're trying to take advantage of? What best practices, what ways of doing things? Like, can you learn, think about like human learning, right? You like, well, I could either figure it out on my own, right? And then go through all the, trial and error and figure things out and figure out the little nuances myself, or I can build on top of the great minds that came before me.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's, that you don't have to, that you can sort of stand on the shoulders of someone else, right? You don't have to do everything. So Scott, tell me a little bit about, you weren't always in the software game in terms of building a software and running a company. So, but before that, I think you kind of cut your teeth, right? You got experience writing custom integrations. So can you talk a little bit about what it's like, because you were obviously in that was your job, right? I mean, a job that you wrote custom stuff for people back in the day. That's how it normally was. Talk a little bit about what it's like to write one of those, and then like how those take on a life of their own, even after you leave the job.
Yeah, I think it was, I was an engineer at a manufacturing company, and I kind of self-taught myself. I think the first thing I worked on was Microsoft Access, which was like a really at the time, a very database program that was from Microsoft. And it was like, pretty easy for as entry level way of getting into programming. And you could do a lot with point and click and things like that. And then over time, I started learning how to write more, Visual Basic and the C#. So you started learning how to do programming in general and best practices. But starting out there, you ended up, I think VB6 was like something I wrote in back in the day. And as soon as I understood how the tool worked, like how to build, you could make code do what you wanted to do, which is like pretty addictive experience. If once you figure it out, that like everything you look at like is a problem that you could use, right? That could be automated. You'll see. So I used to eventually, like I was doing the job of like a manufacturing engineer, which is what CADTALK kind of automated. And then eventually they were like, this kid kind of knows, because I'd been in college, this kid kind of knows stuff. Let's have him just kind of cruise around and figure out how to improve stuff. And then I did that for many years actually. But it really was like looking at people's workflows and figuring out what they were doing. And could I use code or a tool or build something that could streamline what they do and save them some time and basically get more utilization out of people. I mean, lack of a better way of saying it, or make them more efficient, right? Like, how do we do that? And so you end up building a lot of programs. I mean, building a lot of stuff and very, very specialized to like the problem that they have, using, a lot of things I did were integrations, because that's kind of what, we already had systems in place. We used to have an ERP, like I think it was Sightline at the time. And then we had like different systems. So a lot of it was like tying things together. But it was very tightly coupled and it was kind of built for that problem. And then what I learned really quickly is that companies rarely stay the same. Like they don't, like things are always evolving over time. And then what happened is that people went like, oh, that works really well, Scott, but like now we're doing it this way. And this really works well, Scott, but now we're doing, or today that thing didn't work the way you expected to because our data was bad, or this, like all this stuff. So everything that I built became like a little job for me. After that, it was like a maintenance job that I had to do. And then eventually I couldn't build anything anymore because I was too busy keeping all the stuff that I had built running. And that was my full-time job, like keeping this stuff running. And it really just got like boring. I mean, it wasn't very satisfying at that point because it's just like, oh my gosh, like I'm a prisoner of my own ingenuity.
You're making.
Yeah, my making, right? Yeah. And it was like, I just didn't. And the only way to get out of that was like, obviously leave the company or do something else and that kind of thing. And then, and then of course that kind of, I felt bad about that because it's going to leave them in a lurch. Nobody else understands what I'm doing. And so there's all of these like huge performance improvement out of building the thing, but then like all the devils in the details of maintenance, right? Like how do you keep this thing going once you have it? Because what happens is the business tends to mold itself around the tools. I think a lot of people forget about that. Like even processes, they gave him more kind of deeper into thinking, like the process of the way you do things. Think about like how much it depends on the tools you have at your disposal at the time that you're creating the process, right? So you can even go back, my background's industrial engineering. It's about the engineering of processes. And you're always like, why do they do X and Y? And I always love the example of like, there was a recipe that people have been following for generations about how to make a roast. And then the recipe, it was like, pull the roast out and then cut off both sides of the roast and then put it in a pan and then put it in the oven and then cook the thing for several hours and all this kind of stuff. And it'd been like 3 or 4 generations of like moms making this roast. And we couldn't figure out like, and then somebody was like, kind of goes back and analyzes the recipe and goes, hey, why do you cut off the ends of the roast in the beginning? And everybody's like, I don't know. It's just what it says in the recipe. We just do it this way. And then, make long story short, the reason why is that like the great-great-grandmother who created the recipe, their oven was too small to fit their entire roast. So the tool drove the process. Think about it. The tool of the oven drove how they made the roast, and then nobody ever questioned it. So so people become very dependent upon the tools, and they only remember why they make the decisions they make, and they kind of get into a rut of using the thing. And then if the thing breaks, it becomes like we need the tool again because we've oriented it around the fact that we have this thing. We don't even remember what it was like to do it the other way. And so it becomes like, like a mission critical, what used to be kind of like a cool thing that made things faster becomes a mission critical thing really quickly. And then your job turns into that. So like, how do you solve the bigger problem then of how do I build something that outlasts me or requires me to be the person who keeps it going? And the only way, and that's where like platforms and things like that come into play. You come into, and really even a platform, if nobody knows how to use your platform, it might as well be custom because it doesn't really help you. So you really want to get into where the knowledge, the barrier to entry of the platform is low, and the knowledge can be dispersed easily. And then you have something really powerful where it lets you build really, really cool stuff, but also in an environment where it can be maintained over time. Conversely, though, you do give up a certain amount of flexibility by doing that. Okay. And then but that could be a good thing. Like the flexibility could be, I mean, we deal with this a lot with implementations, right? You're like, hey, the customer asks based on their experience, what they want. But we have the experience of, hundreds of customers. So we do things that like make no sense to the customer based on their problem, but make a lot of sense when you think about the collective amount of problems that we've seen over the years. So by buying into our platform, they basically get to absorb that knowledge. Sometimes they're frustrated they have to absorb that knowledge. Like, why do I have to worry about that? Like, I don't have that problem. I wish I had a dime for every time somebody said they don't do that. And then like 3 months later, they do that thing. But like, that's true. I mean, so you're paying for that, but you're also hindered by that. I mean, I remember even like, that makes it, I'll tell that story later, but that makes sense. Kind of what I'm describing? Or?
Yeah, no, it does. It's really clear that, I've heard this too, where customers basically had a person like you, right? Had either an intern or a guy, right? Always have a guy who built an integration or a guy who built a bunch of stuff. And that guy has been working there forever or a long time, or decides to retire or to quit or to move on. And he was maintaining it. And to your point, it's like, then it breaks and no one knows how to use it. And then sometimes that's when they'll come to us and say, hey, we're tired of having this risk out there and not having anyone on staff to be able to do it. Like it worked fine or great when they used it, but if it broke or they need to modify it, no one else knew how to do it. Right. It was not something that they could scale up with, right. That they could use over time. They just didn't have enough resources internally or the knowledge internally, or if they did, just those people already had commitments, right? They just need something that was simpler, something that they could use that more simply. So that's one of the benefits of some kind of platform or off-the-shelf integration that you can use. It doesn't require all of that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think if you even take it like step, so let's go up to the next step where you have a platform like a Zapier or a Make.com or MuleSoft or Boomi. Why isn't that good enough? And I think it's like, because it's still, I mean, which can be very, very powerful. You can do a lot of things with those tools. Like they're like the next level up. You have a tool it's basically a platform that has kind of these off the shelf integrations to it that you can then do things. But the problem, once again, I always think about it being like a higher level language. First, you have, just like you have in like programming language, you have machine code that goes to assembly, that goes to C, that gets into C++ and the C#. So you have all these languages that build on top of each other. The same thing with like integration platforms. They kind of like you build upon, like you have a higher and higher level language or thing that you're working with to solve the problem, right? And at every level that you take on a higher level language, you assume a certain amount of overhead to put like, you assume a certain amount of overhead to make things simpler that you don't have to manage them. So like in the case of, let's use an example from programming like .NET or most like Java and those programs have something called a virtual machine or a runtime that deals with memory management. So if you're writing in code, if you're back in the old C days, you had to figure out like how to clean up your memory, and otherwise you have memory leaks and your software burns up all the memory on the computer and it reboots and just not good. So if you write in like Java and .NET, I think Java was the first one to do it, in .NET, you don't have to worry about memory anymore. It has a thing called garbage collection. It just goes around and cleans up the garbage for you. But that takes on a certain amount of overhead and it reduces flexibility to do that. But you don't have to, like, you're not having to roll your own garbage collector and figure out how to do it and then deal with all the bugs of that and all the other kind of stuff, because that problem has been proven and been solved by some of the greatest programming minds in the world, right? They solved it. You could just take the benefit of using that. Okay. Same thing with like like custom software. You don't know what you don't know. So what's the chance of your solution being better than somebody who's done nothing but that for the last however much time, right? So you can say the same thing with integration. You're like, okay, well, I can roll my own and and then pay the ignorance tax of not knowing I don't know. Or I can use a tool like Zapier or these things, which will take out all the nuance of talking to that API or talking to that thing and tokens and all that kind of stuff that I got to deal with, in order to integrate. Like I don't have to worry about using, I don't have to worry about learning JSON and like APIs and REST stuff. And it just does all that stuff for me. I can just point and click and do it. But it doesn't have a lot of knowledge in it embedded into it. It doesn't have best practices. It doesn't have somebody who's solved the problem you have specifically and built into it. It's a general tool. It's another level language. So think of it like C, right? It can do it. It's just not going to, you're just going to have to roll a lot of your own stuff. And the logic and the business rules and the best practices are not going to be there. Okay. Now you go to an integration like CADTALK, which is very domain specific. Like I'm going to solve this problem of taking designs and then moving them from engineering to manufacturing back and things like that. And there's like unique little idiosyncrasies of bills of material and ERPs and how they work. And like, when to bump revisions and when to phase things in and out. And like all these like things that require a lot higher level of domain knowledge, we have baked into the solution. We've got solutions around that. We've got knowledge. We've got domain expertise. And we baked that into the product to keep you on rails. So you don't do things that you like to basically pay down that ignorance tax for you. You don't have to figure that out again. We figured it out and given you a prescription for the best practice. Now, if you don't like doing it that way, it's going to be restrictive or it can be restrictive. Doesn't mean you can't. It's just going to be a little bit more restrictive. And what we do in CADTALK is we let you kind of go down different layers. You can do more things. We kind of have a prescription and then we say, oh, you can kind of back out and do this other thing if you want here. And that's kind of a little bit of the best of both worlds. And the speed to integration becomes faster with still by maintaining a level of flexibility to adjust itself to each company's issues or needs. Does that kind of make sense using that analogy of the different levels?
Yeah, it sounds like when you were thinking about building the CADTALK, right? You took your experience of that custom tool that you would build, those custom tools, tie things together, create integrations, and realizing the downsides of like having to maintain them. But you like the configurability of it, the ability to have that flexibility. But when we started building a platform or building CAD, the platform CADTALK is now, you wanted to keep as much as you could that flexibility while still providing kind of a framework or an umbrella for how customers or how people should implement so that they could get the most of best worlds, because you didn't want to have a situation where it was locked down and it worked only one way, but also didn't want it to have to, build everything from scratch.
Mm-hmm. Because neither one of these things is wrong. Like from one end, like from a flexibility to a prescriptive approach, it's a dichotomy that you manage, right? You try to manage that. The greatest example of this is like Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak when they built the Apple, right? Like Wozniak was a tech guy and he wanted to have ports on top of the ports and you could plug anything you wanted. And you were like, he wanted to be the most flexible platform for hobbyists that he could find. Because hobbyists want to tinker and they want to try different things and they want to plug in their this and they want to do that. And Steve Jobs was like, no, I want a simple thing that anybody, my grandmother could use. I could literally just, and you can't, top down, we're going to write the software, we're going to make the hardware, it's all going to work together. There's not going to be any of this bugginess. It's just going to work. And both of those things, Microsoft built a very good career, built a very big business off of the Wozniak's philosophy. And obviously Steve Jobs created a very good business off the other philosophy. Both can work. They're a dichotomy to manage. And you'll see these kind of people ebb and flow between these types of tools all the time. They're like, oh, I really love my iPhone, but man, I wish it could just do this one thing where I could use an Android phone and make it do that thing, but I got to deal with the inconvenience of the Android phone all the time. So you have to kind of think about that dichotomy and and kind of make a decision about what you want based on those types of decisions. I think I even run, as a tech guy, I run an iPhone. You have an Android phone, right? An Android, yeah. So it's like you're like, well, Scott, you're a tech guy. Why don't you want the Android phone? I'm like, because when it comes to a phone, I just want it to work, and I don't have that many needs. But there, and just to me, at least at the time, the relearning of the platform for the Android, now if they're so similar, you can't even tell, but to do that wasn't worth it for me for the benefits to have to relearn that for what I use the phone for, but if I were doing something else, I want to use a completely different tool and I'd be worth it to do that, to make that change. So it really comes down to understanding what you want and what you need and what the pros and cons of each decision are.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. That's clear because it's not it's not one is bad, the other is good, right? It's not this kind of dichotomy as you said, but there are trade-offs. Mm-hmm. There are trade-offs, and you have to decide what the trade-offs were, and what do you value? What's important to you? If is having something that is simpler and can do more simple things more valuable to you, or something that's more flexible and complex, but requires a bit more configuration, better for you, right? Like, to your point, right? Do I want it to be stripped down and just work, right? Or do I want it to have all these different kinds of things that you can do with it, from a configuration standpoint?
Mhm. I think it's when it really fascinating is you watch like products over time, and then like they kind of they expand and then contract, they expand and then contract. Like, see, you see this like all like, well, I want like people built an built like you're seeing an ERP, like they built an ERP, and then this ERP becomes like built upon, built upon, built upon, like it's this behemoth thing, and it does like all this stuff. And then somebody comes out with a new product that like streamlines it all. It's real simple. It just does this, it does this, it does this. And everybody's like, oh, we love this product. It's so streamlined. There's all this bloat. There's none of this stuff going on. Like, I really want that one. Then they get that thing and they work it for a while, and they're like, oh, look how streamlined it is. It just does the thing I want it to do. It's perfect. And then they go, man, I wish we would just do this one thing. And they hound that software provider to create that one thing. And then, but there's then another customer begs for the next thing and the next thing. And before you know it, that thing that was really simple and everybody loved becomes the big bloated thing that everybody likes. And then it starts over again. So you have this cycle that goes back and forth, back and forth. So like maybe a different way to look at it, which is the way I look at it, is like, okay, let's build something that lets you kind of adjust it to your needs without bloating the product. And then build some best practices on top of it to make it look like it just does the simple thing. But it has a layer below it that lets you do the complicated thing based on your use case. And then that keeps the product from bloating way up and becoming this behemoth that nobody likes, but at the same time providing the flexibility that the power users want.
Yeah, that kind of leads me into that idea that you talk about bloated. It's like, what could happen when you build your own integrations, or if you customize, even if you customize, not just integrations, but any kind of software. If you have to customize something, is that technical debt, right? The more you add to a product, like you said, the more that you add to it to cover all those different things, really kind of adds up and becomes harder to maintain.
Oh yeah, it's like every feature that you add starts with negative value. Everything you add to a piece of software, or you add it to any system, actually any system that you think about, not just software, everything you do to change it starts with negative value, because the change itself causes disruption, like in software world, it causes the possibility of a bug, which would derail the system. In a system standpoint, you're causing a decision point that has to be, or an interruption to the flow that basically to absorb the difference. All those things start the day you put them in place, start with negative value. So everything you make a decision about to tweak something, you have to see, is the long-term value going to outweigh the negative value of today?
Right.
And so yeah, it's like that's really how you approach all these things. It's like, do I want to complicate it? Do I want to add this thing, even though like there's a lot of pressure and it makes a lot of sense for the situation? How do I like always start with the idea that this thing creates negative value? And so I think when we build features in CADTALK, we always look at like, well, could I build a feature that would solve 10 problems instead of solving a feature that would solve one problem?
Right.
Because I've got to, like, with 10 problems being solved, I have a better chance of getting out of the negative on this feature.
Right. Well, what happens? I know how we design CADTALK, and in terms of building, like, to your point, features that allow us to configure or to achieve 10 different things for a customer, right? That's flexible enough. But what about the scenario where you just have a product, right? It does what it does. And then why not then just customize it for the customer who needs it, right? Because it kind of does the same thing, right? It's like, hey, we have a standard tool. It does a standard thing. But if a customer says, well, I want all these features, well, then you can customize it and add those features for that one particular customer. Why not do it that way?
Well, I think there's a huge amount of technical debt with that, right? I mean, and you're like, well, what's technical debt? It's like, I'm trying to think of a good analogy for this would be, imagine like that we created new letters like every time we wanted to create a new word. Okay. And right now we use the alphabet. right? The alphabet's, I mean, correct me if I'm like, was it 26 letters? 26 letters?
6 letters,
Okay,
at least in
26
the
letters.
English alphabet.
Yeah, English alphabet, right? So we say we're going to use 26 letters for the English alphabet, and we can create every word in the dictionary off of that 26 letters. Okay. And we all agree on the same 26 letters. We're just moving them around in different order. Okay. Or I could say, I'm going to do copy the alphabet. So I can still use the same 26 letters, but I'm just going to keep adding letters for every different conversation that I get into. All right. And then I realized that like, oh, darn, like the letter K doesn't really work for me anymore. And actually I found a problem with letter K. Nobody can pronounce it. Crap. What am I going to do with that? So I got to go back to every conversation, language, everything that goes everywhere and figure out how to get rid of letter K because it doesn't work anymore. Right. As opposed to just saying, stop using letter K, in my one system. Right. And maybe that's not the best example, but I think it's the idea that you're taking these pieces and you're able to combine them and solve lots and lots of problems without creating a new alphabet.
Right. Without like recreating the wheel, right? It's like that movie Multiplicity. Do you remember that? That was I'm showing our age here. That was Mr.
Michael Keaton.
Michael Keaton, yeah. Michael Keaton and that Multiplicity where they would make a copy of a copy of a copy. Mm-hmm. And then each copy they made, the version got something happened to it, right? Like
I remember that.
One copy was like the guy was really, really very feminine, right? Like one copy was very like machismo, really, really, really masculine, right? And another copy was childlike, almost like he'd been stunted in his growth in terms of like growing up. And so all these different versions of him, there's copies of copies. They degrade over time, right? You get degrading and you can't fix them.
Yeah, and then you're like, how do you? It's the same problem that you have with like the one. It's almost very similar to the problem you have with just writing on your own. It's like every day. It's not like you learn something, a best practice, and then it's like you learn a best practice and then we have it forever. It's like these things evolve, right? So if you have, like especially a case of code base, or you're creating like, well, if I'm doing a platform and then we're integrating the best practices into the platform all the time, you get to take advantage of the cumulative knowledge of everyone on the platform. But if I build everything one off, then how do you spread the knowledge back around? Because you literally have like you have a fork in the road. Like that thing has its own life now, and It doesn't see what the other things are doing anymore unless you consciously integrate it back in again. But like how many times? But that's work. Every time you have to go back and update the copy, it's a lot of work. So that's a problem. So most people just won't do it. So I think it's the idea of like, we're all running I think the way that we approach it is that we're all using the same alphabet here, and then, and we're to make all the same kinds of words, but I can make the words for you just a little bit different than the words for that person, but we're still using the same alphabet. We're not creating new alphabets every time.
Right. I still use that Latin alphabet either way. So Scott, what are some, we talked a bit about the benefits, right? We talked about faster implementation because you don't have to build everything from scratch. But we talked about like more reliability, right? And to your point, I think you also talked about, which I really liked, was like building the best practices of that workflow, of what the knowledge, right? The cumulative knowledge of all of those different things. So you get those benefits while you do give up some flexibility because, it is not built, just ready for you in terms of like, it's not exactly fits your process exactly, right? But it has got all the built-in best practices and workflows. And also future proofs, right? So it allows you in the future to, if your process change, I think you mentioned it when you were working, like people come back to you and say, hey, our process changed, or our data is bad, or something happened that you had to keep tweaking it, right? And then having something that is configurable that you can work with allows you to future proof it, right? You can use it for years, and if you need to change something, you can. And because, again, everything's open to you and to do that. So Scott, that's been a good conversation. I wanted to kind of wrap up what some of our main points we talked about. We talked about the kind of 3 different types of integration: the full-on custom integration, the sort of middle middleware, kind of like you said, MuleSoft or Boomi or Zapier, things like that. And then, of course, something that's like CADTALK, like a pre-built integration platform that is very specific for use cases, but also provides that kind of configurability. I always think, are there other platforms that are similar to CADTALK for like, but not in the integration space, or at least not in the CAD integration space? Are there platforms like CADTALK, maybe like an AP automation or warehouse, or any other integrations that you know about that have similar kind of ideas or platforms?
I mean, the only one I could think of, that has similar type of. I mean, they're not really integration first focused because they solve a problem, but they integrate to a lot of different systems like we do. It would be Avalara, which I think is really interesting. They're solving. It's not quite the same example of that, but it's an idea that they are solving a very specific problem with tax, right? And then they're trying to pull certain data, and the way they solve it is that they normalize the data coming in, then feed into their system. They're not really trying to tie two systems together. Like they're always trying to tie it back into their system. So they're normalizing data from different systems into their system to provide the value of the tax kind of issue, right? That's a platform for doing taxes, but they don't have to, like, I think they're not really an integration platform per se, right? It's still, but how they go about solving that problem would still be somewhat formulaic or has prescriptive, right? It's like, hey, we're going to do it. Because they've got to integrate to all those different and pull, all the different districts and know all the rules. And like they are doing it. They've normalized how that's done. So all you have to worry about is, so think about like having to deal with 1,000 different integrations or interfaces around the world, or hundreds of thousands to deal with all these different tax jurisdictions. And they've built all that and they consolidate it into one thing, which is Avalara. Right. And then they have best practices about how to report and what you need, information you need, and all of that kind of stuff. And then you're building integrations to all these different ERPs to feed into that engine so it knows how to deal with it. And the way they do it is they just normalize it into one data that they can deal with. So I was thinking like, we talk about this in systems theory and things like that. Like how do you design systems? Like, like you have parallel flows of processes or single flow process, and single flow is always more efficient because there's less decision points. But so if you have a system that's been fine tuned that has like that's a pipeline of work that's going on, and you're flowing data from all these different places into that pipeline. This is going to sound really technical, but the sooner you can hit the branches, like say you have all this big funnel of like this, all these things are feeding into that pipeline. But if you're having to say, well, when it's this kind of data, like the more you can make everything normalize and look the same, if that pipeline can work, the more efficient it is. So that's kind of what they do, is they do more of a pipeline method of like, let's take all this data from all these different systems and normalize it into like AP, like invoices. We have an invoice data structure, and then we take the invoice data structure. Once we normalize it from this integration into that data structure, then we can process it through our pipeline to deal with all these different districts and all that kind of stuff. So it's a different model, but it goes down to the idea of that that they have a domain specific problem they're fixing, and they're dealing with the integration of all that. In this other case, they're just dealing with the integration of lots of jurisdiction of taxes and things like that, and also multiple systems of ERPs. Yeah.
Right. So if Scott, I like to come away with these conversations with recommendations or things that we can help people who watch these, like how they think about it. One of the things I was thinking about here, what I might recommend is that when someone looks at a piece of software or integration software like ours, or any piece of software, I think you have to do that analysis, right? Not just the build versus buy analysis, which people often do, but also the cost benefit analysis of buy versus build, but also like what you're getting for the work, right? You're not just getting a piece of software, but you're getting those best practices. You're getting the knowledge and this of how to do that process, right? And you're getting all of that, removal of that headache. Do you have any other kind of recommendations that for a company that is looking at a piece of software or looking at an integration, like what they should consider, given that it's a spectrum, right? It's a spectrum decision.
Yeah, I think that we might talk about this in other podcasts too. It's like, don't think of the tool as not just the tool. The tool is the company is, and the tool is the collective of everything, the service plus the tool that you provide, and the knowledge of those people in that company. So it's like, you're not just buying the software, you're buying the service and the knowledge of that company's expertise along with it, right? So you're not just, I think people are like, well, give me the tool, give me the tool, give me the tool. But like the tool is not the product. The tool is part of the product. The product is all the other things around it, including the services.
Right. It's that collective knowledge, right? It's that experience. It's also the mindset, I think, even of how you would solve that problem. Because of course, if you have a preconceived notion of how to solve that problem and that doesn't coincide with what you need, then it's not really valuable to you.
I mean, that's kind of the other misconception. People always think about it as like, people don't think of it this way, but sales is a service. It really is. So like, if you think about, like, I talk to a salesperson and you're like, oh, I got to deal with a salesperson. They're just trying to sell me. But you can also look at it being like, well, sometimes you don't even know what you need. That's the irony. It's like, I have this problem I need to solve. And what is it that I should get? Like, where's the tool? Like, what is it that I need to buy? What is it that I need to do? And like a salesperson, you're providing the service of educating them on what it is they even need, and if you do that really well in your organization, which is part of the organization, then you are providing a service. You are providing value to filter out all of the things that aren't going to work to show them the thing that will.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Right. Yeah. And that someone who's really good at sales was going to help you solve that problem, give you the right advice, give you the kind of teach you what you don't know, right? Because when you're looking, you don't know what you don't know. That's the thing, right? You really don't know what to look for. Someone who's really good in that area can consult with you and give you, educate you about what you should think about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think like a lot of times it gets like a bad rap because people they think there's bias, and there is bias. I mean, why wouldn't there be? But it doesn't mean the data is wrong. It just means that like the whole job of the salesperson, especially for a complex or a technical product, the idea would be to guide you and help you filter. People are always like, there's a lot of things are done by paradox of choice. There are people afraid of making the wrong decision. Mm-hmm. And then really all they need to do is make a decision. And then by asking somebody and talking to somebody, or even, salespeople included, that's what their job is to help you decide, help you by giving, and the way you decide is by filtering the information and pointing you in the right direction. And that's the job of sales. So like the sales part of the organization, the consulting, the product itself, the expertise, the collective knowledge of the company, all of that is what you buy when you buy a product.
Yeah. That's good. That's a good takeaway. Yeah, it's a good takeaway. It's all of that together. It's not just the product itself, which is important, but also the service, the knowledge of the people you're working with, so who can help you solve that problem and be that partner in the future.
Absolutely.
Well, Scott, another great discussion. Really appreciate you coming here. Any last thoughts before we sign off and let the audience go?
No, I think we covered it pretty well. I mean, I think any more than that, like I'll start to get too technical and I'll lose people too fast. So as like people can tell, it's like I'm a deep thinker in this type of problem, and I think about it a lot. So sometimes it's easy to get off on a tangent with some of these things. So I think it's a good time to just I think it's a good time to put a button on this or a bow on this. Is a good one. So.
No, it's good. I mean, every time we have these conversations, I learn a little bit more from you, even though I've known you for my whole life and even a long time here at CADTALK, to keep learning from how you think about it, how you make the comparisons or the analogies in terms of how you think about it and why the problem matters, or how people should think about it, right? Give them that good information. So I learned something new this time. So that was really helpful. So that's all for us today on the Integrate Intelligently podcast. You can find us wherever you subscribe to podcasts, Apple, Spotify, YouTube. Of course, you can watch us here right on YouTube and subscribe. If you got any questions or you're interested in seeing more about CADTALK, you can, of course, visit our website at CADTALK.com. You can also, feel free to make a comment if you want to be on an episode, you want us to cover something on an episode that we haven't covered yet. Feel free to make a comment, and we'll be happy to talk about whatever it is you need to solve. So, Scott, great seeing you again here. Until next time.